Hi, it's Patricia McMichaud, and I am going to present the public versus private sector for the history and theory of of public administration. So we're going to begin talking about two agencies. One in the public sector, which would be the County of Riverside Homeless Programs Unit, and the second would be a private foundation. One which I've chosen is the Crow Johnson Foundation. We're going to talk about some similarities and some of the differences, and then we're going to share some final thoughts about how important or why those differences and similarities matter, and then we'll sum it up. Okay, so let's get started. Similarities. Interestingly enough, I only found one similarity. And that's just me thinking this, there may be other thoughts, but the similarity that I found was that, yes, the agencies, actually, I found two. So the similarities were that, as with any organization, public or private, they do happen to deal with the hierarchy. And so there's always in a public entity, particularly, there's always a manager, a director, an assistant director, um, and then it kind of funnels its way down. In the private sector, particularly at the agency that I mentioned, there's generally either a CEO at a foundation or a president of the board or someone, and then there's program staff. They're the people who actually do the work. So there is this sense of hierarchy where they have people who do specific job tasks, and so there is a sense of hierarchy. So there is a similarity in that. There's also a similarity in, the goals and objectives of the organization. Even though both agencies have goals and objectives that they're um, seeking to administer and to work out within the organization, how they go about managing those day-to-day actions are different in both of these in both of these organizations. Their processes and procedures are different. Um, in a public sector, there's a lot of rules and traditions and laws and bureaucracy that govern the public organization. Whereas in the private sector, those goals, they're probably set out once a year. They could change from year to year. You can sit down and you don't have anybody to answer to. Should you look next year and say, you know what, we're going to change our goals. That can happen in the private sector more so because of bureaucracy that happens in the public sector. Now I want to talk a little bit about the differences. Um, are simply in that in any organization you need staff. And in order to do that staff, in order to accomplish hiring staff, you do this hiring, then you do this recruitment and hiring process, which is totally different for both organizations. In a private organization, you assess your needs and look at what you might need in terms of staffing, and you can either fly the position, meaning put a flyer out, you know, or you could hear about someone that someone else knows and might be a good fit for the organization, and you can just decide to interview, um, hire them on the spot, whatever you choose to do in a private organization. However, on the other end of that is how you need to handle your hiring, your recruitment and hiring in a public sector. In the public sector, you must um, go through a process that probably entails um, a pool of candidates, um, where you have to hire people based on their merit and their education and their competency, and um, all of those things take place in the government agency thanks to the Pendleton Act. Um, and so that's a big difference in how you recruit your staff. It's important that you go through this transparency in your process with the government because of all the bureaucracy. Again, with the Pendleton Act, that you make sure that you're hiring people on their merit and not just because it's someone that you know. There's a transparency, and I've experienced that in both agencies, both types of agencies. When I was hired to work in the public sector, I did have to go through this extensive background check. I don't remember taking any sort of testing, but there, you have to prove that you have your education. You have to send copies of, everything is documented. So there's this sense of transparency and again, merit. In the private sector, if the job, they feel like you're able to do the job. They may say that you need an education, but never do they really ask it for you to bring in your transcripts or anything like that. So you could be hired not just based on merit. It could be by word of mouth. Someone can recommend you. That can happen in the private sector. Additionally, one of the other differences is the procurement of the organizations. In the procurement, we mean how they actually are getting the work done in the sense of, for a public entity, they are usually funded by taxpayers' dollars, and so there's this transparency again, and that in that because you're using taxpayers' dollars, the process for the public agency is they don't have direct control over things that happen, whereas in the um, private industry, you have, you're answering to mostly your investors or your stakeholders, and it's their bottom line is really about how they can make money and um, their own revenue, and um, they're not encumbered by all these regulations, allowing them they can negotiate better pricing for the things that they need because of that. Now the public agencies, they can't negotiate. um, Generally what will happen is a contract is, if they have a bid for work, someone sends a contract in, and the best contract, they have to go through a process. So there's all these red tapes and all these bureaucratic processes that need to take place, even in something as simple as procuring the work. And why this all, when it boils down to people have an opportunity to choose between the two sectors, it really boils down to the hierarchy of needs. People need different things in their workplaces when they're choosing a workplace. And so they look to those needs, how those needs are going to be met, those list of needs, their safety, their esteem, their self-actualization, all of those things are important. And so that's, in my opinion, that's why it matters when you look at both of these types of agencies. Certainly they both have benefits, and they also have different consequences as to making those choices. And so I think it's important that as we look at um, both sectors, we look into the things that we've just discussed here. And I do want to make sure that I referenced that we talked about the Pendleton Act here when we talked about based on merit. We talked about the scientific management theory when we talked about looking at how to efficiently do the work by having different staffing and making sure that the staff is, there's a division of staff. We talked about the bureaucracy when we talked about how they have to hire and process their hiring uh, and recruitment. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved in that. And then finally, we talked about the hierarchy of needs here. Um, Hopefully, I've been able to summarize all of this for you, and there was an understanding in what was being said. Thank you.